So I can introduce myself then. Hi everybody. So I'm a marine biogeochemist. I graduated in marine science. My PhD was in 2010, and then I joined IMS, the Institute of Marine Science here in Turkey in 2011. First with a postdoc, and then with a position as a lecturer. Since the last years, I'm interested in carbon dioxide. We recently started the first carbon dioxide laboratory, marine carbon dioxide laboratory in Turkey. This is a project that is, it's a long-term project, so it's been funded by funding from the Ministry of Infrastructures, as I will mention later on. Today I will talk about the carbon dioxide, the change in the Mediterranean Sea. And the main point is to focus on the North-eastern Mediterranean. So, but first of all, I would like to, sorry, I also have some problem. Okay, so first of all, I want to introduce you the team of the CO2 team at IMS METU. It's a quite large team where we have students and we have people that are helping a lot with all the technical problems and setting up new methods and analyzing CO2 from different perspectives like satellite approach. The first question is, why do we care about carbon dioxide and carbon dioxide fluxes? So since Industrial Revolution, the combustion of fossil fuels and the change of land use has introduced in the atmosphere a huge amount of carbon dioxide. The main problem with this introduction of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is not just the amount, but it's mainly the speed, how this process happens. Because the time that the fossil fuels have been formed is in the range of millions of years. While the process that we are actually, as you can see here, I hope you can see the arrows, the process that that takes out the carbon dioxide from the subsoil to the atmosphere, and the rate, as we are doing today, to the extraction of oil and carbon, actually is very low when you compare with the time of storing this carbon dioxide under Earth. So we are talking about completely different time scale. So basically, we can say that nowadays we don't have a natural process that can counter the extraction of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And this is the main problem, because this introduction of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere actually cannot go back down to the subsoil, and then actually invades the other spheres of the Earth system. So then we can find it in the atmosphere, as we know, but we can also find it in other compartments like ocean and Earth. So this increase of carbon dioxide has been well testified, has been well reported already by Keeling. This is the famous Keeling curve. And as you can see, there's a progressive increasing. And nowadays we have a PCO2 of 416, while before the Industrial Revolution, these levels was below 280. So there's a huge amount of carbon dioxide introduced. So the problem with this carbon dioxide is that while it's introduced in the atmosphere, this reinforces the natural process of a greenhouse effect. And reinforcing this process, actually, this causes an increase of temperature. The increase of temperature on the other side has a strong implication on different aspects of the climate. So we have expansion of water, then we have an increasing of sea level. We have oceans get warmer. We have that the glaciers and the polar caps start to melt. So there's not just global warming, but as you know, this implies a climate change. So, but where does this carbon dioxide go after it's emitted in the atmosphere? So a few decades ago, actually, the scientists started to realize, while comparing the amount of emissions of carbon dioxide due to the combustion of fossil fuels with the amount that was found in the atmosphere, they realized that there was a strong mismatch. So basically, all the amount that was combusted was not ending up in the atmosphere. And with the time, when the research actually progressed, we understood that a huge amount of this carbon dioxide is then absorbed by lands and the ocean. So here in this graph, you can see that the purple line is the total emission of carbon due to the human activities, and the red line it's the amount that is accumulated in the atmosphere, while the blue line is the one that has been uptaken by natural processes. So the one that went to the land and the one that has been absorbed basically to the ocean. But now let's focus on how this carbon dioxide entered the ocean. So there are basically, we can focus on two main aspects. First of all, carbon dioxide is exchanged with the ocean. It's a gas, so it's exchanged with the ocean through the sea surface, through the interface. Once carbon dioxide enters the ocean, it is in contact with water and it dissolves to form carbonic acid, and then it dissolves in bicarbonate and in the next reaction to carbonate. So we have this very huge amount of carbon that is stored in the ocean, and when we compare the amount of carbon that we have in the ocean, this is extremely higher than all the other resources if you exclude the rocks. And we are talking about the carbon that is actually stored in the deep part of the ocean. So if you want to compare, this is something like 80 times the carbon dioxide that we have in the atmosphere. So it's a really huge amount of carbon dioxide. Then, I mean, it's easy to reply to this answer. So how much carbon dioxide can enter the ocean? Well, a very huge amount. So the ability of the ocean to take this carbon dioxide is extremely high. But of course, there are some limits on it. And as you probably have heard, ocean acidification is one of these problems. Ocean acidification is exactly the uptake of, and the consequence of the uptake of the ocean of this carbon dioxide and a progressive decrease of surface pH. So now let's see now how carbon dioxide entered the ocean. So basically there are different mechanisms, the so-called solution pump and the biological pump. Both mechanisms actually can release and can uptake carbon dioxide depending on the strength of the different direction. But the physical pump, the solution pump that you see here basically happens because there's a difference of temperature between the surface and the water, and this colder water can absorb a huge amount of carbon dioxide. Vice versa, when the water is high, there's a release of carbon dioxide. Basically, the exchange of carbon dioxide between the atmosphere and the ocean is basically regulated by the difference of partial pressure that you find in the atmosphere and the ocean. And of course, the gas moves from the higher concentration to lower concentration. When we look at the biological pump, so this is the first process, the physical pump, and this is what happens basically in the for example, in the Labrador Sea and in the sites of deep water convection, where you have a strong cooling that trigger increase of density, and then a downwelling of surface water that is enriching carbon dioxide due to the cooling and the exchange with the atmosphere. The other process that is also very relevant for the transfer of surface carbon dioxide from the surface to the deep part of the layers is the organic pump, the biological pump. So photosynthesis is a very important role in this because photosynthetic organisms, algae, plants, and so on, they uptake carbon dioxide from inorganic form and it transforms in organic form. And then when these organisms start to die, they sink and transfer this carbon along the water column and ultimately on the bottom to start the sedimentation process. So now, how does this carbon dioxide enter to the Mediterranean Sea? Well, the Mediterranean Sea is quite interesting in this respect. It's as you all know, it's a marginal sea, so it's it doesn't really, the budget that we will find in this area will not really have a strong impact on the global ocean, because if you look at the surface of Mediterranean, this is not more than 0.8% all over the ocean. But the important point of the Mediterranean Sea is that there are the circulation and the characteristics of the Mediterranean Sea are very interesting to understand which are the processes that can be very, very relevant for the global ocean. So in particular, in the Mediterranean, we have different sites of deep water formation, deep and dense water formation. These are the where the open ocean convection happens. So in the Western Mediterranean, we have in the Gulf of Lion, as you can see here, in this one. Then we have in the South Adriatic, and then in the last 15-20 years since the East Mediterranean transit, also the Aegean Sea has started to produce a huge amount of deep water that enters then the East Mediterranean and feed the East Mediterranean deep water. And there is also this other side that is often forgotten, and is Rhodos Gyre. Well, Rhodos Gyre has also a very important role. This is also a permanent gyre. The importance of this gyre is that is not that I mean, the convection that happens in this area is not that deep as the one that happens for example, in the Gulf of Lion. And actually, the formation of deep or dense water depends on the cooling of the winter. In any case, this is the main site where you have Levantine intermediate water formation. That is actually the main link between East and West Mediterranean. So now let's see how the different physical and chemical characteristics of the Mediterranean Sea have an impact on the carbonate system. So first of all, as you can see in this picture from Poli, that Mediterranean Sea has this anti-estuarine circulation. This means that the surface water that are poor of nutrients enter from Gibraltar, pass the surface, stays in the surface water, Atlantic water, enters the Western Basin, and then through the Strait of Sicily enters also the East Mediterranean. Then in the East Mediterranean, exactly in the area where we are discussing today, the Rhodos Gyre and the other parts of Eastern Mediterranean, there is a formation of Levantine intermediate water due to the winter cooling and the strong evaporation. And this water, when it's formed, is not so dense to reach deeper layer, but it's dense enough to sink, to downlift, and to be located in a layer between 200 and 500 meters. And then this water goes out to the Western Mediterranean, collects all the organic matter that sinks while she's progressing to the end, to the exit of Mediterranean Sea, and then progressively get enriched with nutrients, and more important, with the inorganic carbon that is the results of mineralization. So at the end of this path, when the water exits from the Gibraltar, the result is that there's a very high content of DIC and total alkalinity, and there's a net export of inorganic carbon to the ocean. Then another important characteristics of the Mediterranean is that there's a strong, the conditions are strongly oligotrophic, and in the Eastern Mediterranean are even ultra oligotrophic. So basically there's generally a very low production that is comparable with the subtropical gyres. Very weak biological pump then. And then this is the reason, because different studies, even though different study has postulated that the Mediterranean cannot be really a sink of carbon dioxide for the atmosphere, but it's more, can be a source, or even though it can be a sink in some periods of years, it's a very weak sink, because basically what is missing is the strong biological pump that acts in other parts of the ocean. Then the Mediterranean has an interesting characteristics that has a higher pH in respect to the ocean. And together with the temperature of the water that is generally higher than the global ocean, and the high level of total alkalinity, Mediterranean Sea has a low Revel factor that implies that it has a very high capability to contrast variation of PCO2. And then as a marginal sea, being a marginal sea actually, and being a small basin in respect to the global ocean, the renewal time of the waters is quite short. And then together with the deep convection, actually, this implies that there's a high anthropogenic carbon inventory in the Mediterranean, because this has been vehiculated through the continuous production of water renewal waters that are first in contact with the atmosphere, that then can uptake the anthropogenic carbon and then transfer in the deep layer and exit then from Gibraltar. Finally, I mean, this is a very important characteristics of the Mediterranean Sea. Due to the strong evaporation and to the high river inputs and high inputs from the Black Sea, the Mediterranean Sea has a high alkalinity and a high DIC content. And as I say, this is an important characteristic that increases the buffer capability of the Mediterranean Sea. So finally, another important thing that has been recently discussed in a paper, Mediterranean Sea, even though has a high acidification rate while comparing with the ocean. I mean, it's comparable with the level of acidification in the ocean. Still, I mean, the impacts on the organisms is still apparently quite limited. Why this? Because the waters of Mediterranean are oversaturated, So basically, this implies that there's no dissolution of calcium carbonate even in the deep layer. So now let's go to the points that I want to address in this talk. So we focus, as I said, on the North-eastern Mediterranean, and the main things we want to understand is if this area is a sink or a source of carbon dioxide. And the second point is how this carbon dioxide vary over time and over space. And finally, which are the processes that control the surface water of PCO2. So the area where we focus is, you can see here in the small square, we are in the East Mediterranean. So the area goes from the Rhodos Gyre, including Rhodos Gyre, till the Cyprus, the Cilician Basin. I mean, the east part of Cyprus. And is the area that is more coast, close to the coast of Turkey. This area has not been explored before, so these results are quite interesting. Other studies have been done in the East Mediterranean, but every cruises actually went to the south of Cyprus. Nobody actually knows I mean, at least it's not been published, which is the dynamics in this area. So the physical characteristics of this area is that we have this, as I mentioned before, Rhodos Gyre that has a cyclonic circulation, and we have another small gyre that is the Cyprus Gyre here, and the current. I cannot see my mouse. And the current, the Asia Minor current flows from east to west. in the way you can see the arrow, the red arrows, they are in river inputs in coastal waters, and there are also many creeks and many inputs along all the Turkish coast. So what we did, I mean, we went 2 times in this area. We chose to go in 2 different regions that have different characteristics. So we went in March and we went in September. And with our system, underway system of to measure carbon dioxide, we had continuous measurements of PCO2, temperature, salinity, and fluorometer. So we could actually have already a quite interesting view of which are the process, how the different parameters changes, and also which are the process behind that. So results. So this is the first picture of the, here on the left you have March, and on the right you have September. And the plots that I put here, just to give you an idea of what's the characteristics of the area, is the temperature and salinity. So you can see that from the color they are, I choose to put not the same scale here, sorry about that, but because otherwise we couldn't have appreciated the variability, the spatial variability in the winter. So please notice that the scales are different. So what we can see here is that the temperature in winter is around 17.6, and the variation of temperature is pretty small. So we are within 3 degrees of variation. And completely different situation can be observed in summer, where there's almost 10 degrees difference, and the variation is pretty high. And the highest variation, as you can see already, it's between the Rhodes Gyre and the coastal areas. Coastal areas are always warmer, and the Rhodes Gyre, where we have this upwelling of, the upwelling of the deep waters, it's always colder, obviously, because of the uplifting of cold waters. In terms of salinity, for the winter period, we have a higher variability of salinity. Basically, the variability is almost the same, but the main difference, because we have almost 1 PCU of variation, the main point is that we can observe here that in winter the influence of rivers is much stronger than how it is in summer and how it is expected. When we look at the carbon dioxide, we have a very different situation between winter and summer. So in winter, we have very low values, very low, values below around between 3 and 300 ppm, while in summer, we have values that are much higher. They are always much higher than 400, almost all 400. When we, so now to evaluate these results, actually, I should explain a bit more what is how the flux happens. So this is what happens in the surface water, but we want to understand in respect to the exchange with the atmosphere. So the air-sea CO2 fluxes work according to this equation. So this is the fluxes, and this depends on the difference of PCO2 that you have in the sea minus the PCO2 that you have, the partial pressure of CO2 that you have in the air. So when this value is positive, it means that there is a release of carbon dioxide, from the ocean, and vice versa. So when this value is negative, there's an uptake. And so basically this value gives you the direction of the flux, while these other 2 parameters actually regulates the intensity of the flux. So this one in blue is the constant of solubility, and this other is the gas transfer velocity. That depends on wind and on temperature. So again, it's important to understand that these two parameters just regulate the intensity of the flux, but it doesn't really impact on the direction. Okay. So what we will focus today is basically about this delta PCO2. So to understand which is the direction of the flux. So these are the results of the two cruises. So I put here in blue with this ellipse the area of Rhodos gyre. So what is very interesting to notice here is that Rhodos gyre has always negative values, meaning that it's always behave as a sink of CO2. Another things that can be noticed here is that in March we always have again negative values. So March is always behaves as a sink. In the winter season we always have a sink, while in summer there's a net release of carbon dioxide that is actually stronger in the coastal areas and a bit weaker in proximity of Rhodos gyre and the open waters. So this is, as you can see here, I mean, when we compare with the present level, this is another way to visualize that. But one point here to notice is that this value of PCO2 that happened in March, is lower than the increase that we have in summer. In other words, basically the sink that we observe in winter seems to be stronger than the release that we observe in summer. So now, which are the different mechanisms that affect PCO2 at the surface? So now, to understand which are the controls of these fluxes, we should analyze a little bit more which are the mechanisms. So in this picture, you can see there are, I've listed these three main mechanisms. And when we talk about physics, basically we have to divide in two parts. The first part is the thermodynamics of gas solubility. So as I mentioned before, when you have water temperature, when the water temperature is low, the level of carbon dioxide that can enter that can be absorbed by the water is much higher than when the water is higher. On the other side, there's also physical dynamics, of course, impacts very much on the surface PCO2, because as you can see here, there's a mixing with other waters, and it can be, you can have like increase of surface carbon dioxide when you have uplifting or upwelling of deep water that are enriched of carbon dioxide due to the mineralization. But also you can, I mean, the physical process can also have a diluting effect. So for example, if there's a mass of water that are arriving from an area that has been highly where there's been a high bloom, then the level of carbon dioxide in those water will be extremely low because of the uptake by biological processes. In terms of chemical process, the calcification in this solution, they also have opposite effects on the carbon dioxide levels. And finally, biological process, as I mentioned, mineralization tends to increase carbon dioxide because it transforms organic matter to inorganic matter. And photosynthesis uptake can then decrease the carbon dioxide. So one point actually now to focus on, so we saw there's this big difference of PCO2 between summer and winter. But one point that needs to be highlighted is that the temperature has a really strong impact on the capability of water to keep inside the carbon dioxide. So, for example, if we imagine to move a parcel of water from the polar region that has, for example, -2 degrees, and we bring it to the polar region, to the equatorial region. So the variation of temperature, that is 32 degrees, would make the amount of carbon dioxide becomes bigger of 4 times. So warmer water have a higher content of carbon dioxide in respect to cold water. So now to understand which are the process behind, we should be able to remove the thermodynamic effect of PCO2 linked to the temperature. So to do that, we calculated this normalized PCO2 that takes into account the average of temperature over the year and the temperature in situ observed. So when we apply this formula, you can see here in the second graph, you see that in winter there's a strong increase of when we normalize to the average temperature, there's of course a higher capability to take carbon dioxide into the water. So this graph that shows the difference, as you can see here, this is the TPCO2, that's the difference between normalized minus the in situ PCO2, actually shows you that there's in winter we have of course higher content, while in summer is the other way around. So the thermodynamic effect in summer makes higher content of carbon dioxide in the water. Now, when trying to understand which are the physical process, the process that underline this concentration, we compared the surface PCO2 water with the different parameters. So in this graph represents March, and there's a you can see here, this is the values over time. Along the different path that we did during the cruise. So you can see here that the two profiles are quite different. The two trends of temperature and PCO2 are quite different. And indeed, when we check the correlation of PCO2 versus temperature, this is pretty low. And this is actually quite strange when you look at that. So then we decide to try another parameter, of course, and we try with the salinity. And this is actually was very interesting because the correlation was extremely high, and the same things was observed also with the fluorescence that was things. And of course, in this case is the other direction. So we have a negative correlation because you have a higher level of PCO2 when the fluorescence is lower. So when the fluorescence is high, so the production is high, you have a decrease of PCO2. The same analysis we did also in September, and in this case, actually, the correlation was very good, as you can see also by the surface map. Basically, they have a very, very similar patterns. So the temperature was the main control in this season. Then we also compared the salinity, and in this case, there was no correlation between PCO2 and salinity, but when we removed the thermodynamic effect on the PCO2 that we observed, actually all at once the correlation became very, very high. So we passed from a correlation of -30 to a correlation of -80. And you can also see here from the graph that actually they are in counterphase from each other. We did the same exercise for the fluorescence, and in this case, unfortunately, it didn't work. So basically, the main control here was basically the salinity and temperature. So did we expect these results? I mean, what is the literature saying, telling us about this carbon dioxide? So there are not many studies in the East Mediterranean, as I mentioned before, especially about CO2 fluxes. There is a study from Sisma Ventura in 2017. This is being carried out in the area of Crete and in the southern part of Levantine. And they observed that the seasonal surface of water has a high variability in this area, but is mainly temperature driven. And the south part of Crete, the south area of Crete, can be a weak source or a sink for the atmosphere. The southeast Levantine is a CO2 source in the atmosphere for most of the year. But they are talking about the southeast Levantine, and our situation is slightly different because it's we have in our area we have the Rhodos Gyre, where we observed that the difference of PCO2 between atmosphere and the ocean was always negative. So the Rhodos Gyre always behave as a sink of CO2. Another study done with a model approach also found that the CO2 variation seems to suggest to have a slight sink or to be in the equilibrium with the atmosphere. So in our case, our results are slightly different. So we found that this area behaves more like a sink than a source, different to what Ventura observed. But of course, to understand which is the intensity of the fluxes, we need also to calculate the other parameters. You remember that we are just measuring the difference of PCO2 between atmosphere and the ocean. Once we add also the intensity, so we calculate which is the wind, which is the effect of solubility, then of course we will be able to make a proper budget in difference between summer and winter. So to conclude, in terms of spatial variability, what we found that is that there's a very strong spatial variability. We arrive even to 100 ppm between coastal and open waters. The highest variability has been observed more in summer than in winter. In the Rhodos Gyre, as I mentioned before, it's always behave as a sink. So potentially this is a very important site for a CO2 sink. And as I said, coastal area has the highest variability of PCO2. In terms of air-sea CO2 exchange, this has a very clear seasonality. So we have in winter, there's a clear ocean uptakes of CO2, so there's a net sink. In summer, we observe exactly the opposite situation, so there's a net source for the atmosphere. And the difference of partial pressure between atmosphere and the ocean is stronger in summer. Is stronger in winter in respect to summer. So the process that are underpinning this seasonal variability in winter seems to be mainly biological and physical, like evaporation or dilution of waters. And in summer, seems to the biological process seems to be quite weak, as we have seen. There's basically no correlation with the photosynthesis. Okay, so to conclude, I want to thank my colleagues from the Laboratory of Oceanography Department. I want to thank especially Vladimir Miroshonesky, that actually has cured the database of this data, and the Bilin second crew. And also, finally, I want to thank the funding body, that is the Scientific and Technological Research Council of Turkey, TÜBİTAK, and the EcoSym project, that is the Center of Marine Ecosystem and Climate Research. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Valeria, for the very interesting seminar. I really enjoyed it, and I hope everyone has enjoyed it as well. And I would like to start with questions. So people that has questions, please raise your hands using the raise hand option. And I can start with a question from Mustafa Mantıkçı. And he's asking about the effect of climate change on the biological carbon pump. And his comment is that atmospheric DIC is taken up by the ocean and 1% is buried in the seabed. So there's a big amount of DIC in the sediments. And temperatures affecting the respiration rates more than primary production. So he's asking about your opinion, how these changes in the pump affect CO2 content of the ocean and the atmosphere.
Well, there are two main implications of on the carbon pump, on the carbon cycle in the ocean. I mean, the warming has two main implications. So the first implication is that you have an increase of stratification, and while increasing stratification, of course, the upwelling of nutrients and then the feeding for primary production is becoming weak. So this is a first implication that goes in the direction of decreasing the biological pump. And on the other side, increase of temperature. The increase of temperature actually increase also the microbial processes. Then the release of carbon dioxide can be even increased. On a side of this, actually, but this is a little bit out of the context of the question of Mustafa. The other point is that while the surface temperature increase, of course, its capability to keep carbon dioxide decreases. So the buffer capability of the ocean, that is one of the main function, we can say, in respect to mitigation of global warming, might decrease. So this is a sort of positive feedback. The positive doesn't mean that it's positive for us, but it's that reinforce each other.
Okay, thank you. And I continue with the questions. The next one is from Bilge Tutak. And he's asking if the Anaximander Mountains and Mud Volcanoes would have any effects on the CO2, PCO2 around the western edge of the measurement area.
Sorry, can you?
So he's basically asking about Anaximander Mountains and the Mud Volcanoes, if they have any effect in the area on CO2, PCO2.
Well, okay, we also thought about that, but honestly I don't expect that. I don't expect that this might have a strong effect. First of all, because we are talking about surface water. So while you have this emission on the bottom of the ocean, this is highly diluted when it arrives to the surface. So I don't really expect this is the things. However, I mean, a more deep study can be done in this. There's actually many studies that have been done in the Ischia, in an island in Italy, in front of Napoli, and but in that case, the sources of carbon dioxide is much shallower, so you can definitely see there's a strong impact on the primary production. And actually, these are very interesting sites because they can be used like a real laboratory to understand which are the implication on biology for the future. But when it's so deep, I don't really expect that this would really impact on probably locally, but definitely not at the surface where we measure the carbon dioxide. There are other processes that are much more stronger than this.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is from Mustafa Yücel, and he's asking about the seasonal variability of atmospheric CO2 over the East Med waters. I think he's asking if the seasonal variability has the effect on the sign of the fluxes.
Okay, I also investigated this part. The first things to say here is that the variation of carbon dioxide in the ocean are like one order of magnitude higher than one or more, even 2 orders of magnitude higher than the changes that happens in the atmosphere. So the values that I put here are values that refers to the global ocean, because we don't have a close station of atmospheric carbon dioxide. But overall, the total variation all over the globe and all over the region per year is not more than 10 ppm. While in the ocean, at least in the area where we have seen, we observed variation of between 2 seasons of 150, even 200 in some sites. So you can understand that the variation is extremely limited. The variation you have in the atmosphere is extremely limited to impact on the variation that we observed in the ocean, and then impacts on the fluxes that regulate this the exchange between atmosphere and ocean. So synthetically, seasonal variability is expected for the atmosphere is expected to be very low when you compare with the variation that you have in the ocean. So I don't think it might affect.
Thank you. And Ahmet Kudesh has a question, and they all thank you, by the way, for the good presentation. And the question is, what is your opinion on comparative deep sediment sinking rates between Black Sea and the Mediterranean, considering greater depths and anoxia in the Black Sea?
Well, there's a huge difference between the Mediterranean and Black Sea. And of course, this is due to the completely different dynamics of the two areas. First of all, the Mediterranean Sea are highly oxygenic, while the Black Sea are not. The main point is that the Mediterranean Sea are oversaturated with the, in respect to the aragonite and calcite. The Black Sea situation is completely different. You have that the deep water are extremely acidic, and the level already at around 75 meters, you have a decrease of pH that is much higher than what you have in the Mediterranean, and basically also in other parts of the ocean. So the things is completely different. In the Mediterranean, for example, you don't have the solution of calcium carbonate because it's, as I said, it's oversaturated, but the different situation is in the Black Sea. Even though the alkalinity and DIC of the Black Sea is quite high. So both systems have a very high alkalinity, Black Sea higher than Mediterranean, but the acidic condition of deep waters in the Black Sea is much higher than the Mediterranean Sea.
Okay. And Diana has some comments, but I would like to give her the microphone for her comments. But before that, I will ask you the question by Ertuğrul Ağırbaş. And he's asking if you have any information on primary production rates depending on CO2 variation along the study area.
I don't have this information. So what he's saying, I guess, is that he's expecting that you have a different variation of primary production depending on the carbon dioxide.
Well, exactly. I think that's the question.
Well, again, I don't think. I mean, in some areas, have been seen that carbon dioxide can be sort of limiting, but overall, in Mediterranean, the biochemistry is so different where you have the main limit is always related to nutrients, because the area, the waters are so stratified that basically most of the times in this Mediterranean phosphate is missing, and also nitrate. And as the waters are very well mixed, you don't really have a lack of carbon dioxide. So honestly, I don't think you might have this kind of limitation to primer production. But honestly, I don't know if there are any studies done in this way. I wouldn't expect, honestly.
Okay, thank you. And Diana Ruiz-Pino is with us from Paris, I assume.
Yes.
Hi, Diana.
Hi, Diana.
How are you? Nice to be with you from Paris.
Thank you. It's good to see you. And I would like to, I didn't want to read your comments, and I would like to invite you to give your comments yourself. Okay,
I would like to start to say bravo, Valeria. It was a very nice talk, and I am really very happy to see that it was a dream for all of us. And now we realize that the lab, the CO2 lab in Erdemli, is going very well and providing very nice results. And I have 3 comments about the results, and maybe for the perspective, which is really very interesting. One is because in the majority of the ocean, PCO2 is correlated with the temperature. For me, this is an striking point. I know only 3 areas where the PCO2 is correlated with the salinity. It's in the polar ocean due to the ice melting, or in the estuarian areas, or now in the Mediterranean Sea. For me, this is a striking point to pointing out in a publication. This is a very nice result. This is one way.
Yeah, this is we also noticed that this is indeed, that's why I made an extra effort to remove the effect of the thermodynamic effect on the PCO2 things, because I mean, it was very interesting to find this the negative correlation with salinity in winter, and I wanted to explore better in summer, and at the end actually we find it. So this means that I guess evaporation and the dilution processes that we still need to understand actually, which are the triggers, they can really have an important role in this area. Yes.
And the second interesting point is the huge things that you observe, you documented in the Rhodes Island, because it is for sure this is connected to the deep water formation.
Yeah.
For me, in the future, maybe an interesting project will be focused in this area, because 100 ppm is a really very huge sink. For me,
absolutely. But even more important, I believe, that this is not just the winter. There's a big difference between with the other sites of deep convection in the Mediterranean. Because you have in some other areas you also have that the exchange is positive in summer, but in this case we found that also in summer it was a negative. So it's quite realistic to think that this is a constant sink all over the year, and this can be can transfer, of course, the carbon dioxide in the intermediate layer that actually then is spread all over the Mediterranean. So in this context, you know that the anthropogenic carbon inventory in the Mediterranean is pretty high while comparing with the global ocean. And I believe that Rhodes Gyre can have a quite important role also in this, because this is the amount of Levantine water that is formed there and that is actually reach every part of the Mediterranean Sea has an important, might have very important implications.
Okay, and the last question is because there are also a very nice connection with the biologists, because your results suggest that in March there are a very good correlation with the fluorescence. Why this? Because the phytoplankton activity is higher.
Yeah, but this is, I mean, due to the limitation of time, I couldn't show all the data, but this is quite clear, because when you look at the vertical profile of the transits that we went, there was actually activity there. So you have that the isopycnal are not broken, so you have a vertical mixing. So this is basically in winter is the only period where you have a production in the East Mediterranean. And I believe it's even, I mean, in that area specifically in March, when you have a sort of equilibrium between the vertical mixing and the restarting of stratification that allows the light to be available for the cells that are moving along the water column. So yes.
Okay. Thank you. Bye bye. Bravo.
Okay. Bye. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you, Diana. It was very good to see you. And last comment, as far as I see, Süleyman has sent one comment, and he's suggesting that surface PCO2 would show a correlation with nitrate and DOC. So it would be good to measure those as well, but I guess it's not trivial, those measurements and the relation.
Sorry, I didn't understand with which parameters?
Surface PCO2 and nitrate and DOC would have a relation. It would be good to investigate that.
For sure, with the nitrate, and we will also do it, because it's this is particularly interesting when you look at the occurrence of primary production, and this is linked also to the mineralization process. So thank you for the suggestion. What I'm planning to do next, I mean, I couldn't say everything in the talk, is actually to understand better the role of physical and biological process, is to analyze the mixed layer depth, and to analyze also the apparent oxygen utilization. So this will definitely clarify, for example, if in the area there is strong mineralization, because here we could find a correlation with the phytoplankton in winter, but maybe there are important mineralization processes happening in summer. So that's why we want to analyze also apparent oxygen utilization, that will tell us if the mineralization process have an important role in summer, for example.
Okay, thanks a lot. And I think we are also very good with the timing. And I would like to thank everyone for joining. We have a small questionnaire about the background of the people that has joined. If you have just a second to vote, we will really appreciate that. And thank you, everyone. Valeria, thanks a lot for this great presentation. I'm sorry that I didn't get to present you, but what I was saying is that you have been organizing this webinar series, but I really wanted you to give this seminar, because both because of this very interesting topic, and also, as everyone has seen, you have prepared a very nice lecture. And we will continue. In 2 weeks, we will have another webinar, and we will announce that. And also, please follow us on the social media. And thanks a lot, everyone. And I would like to give my best regards, and stay healthy and well. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Bye.